Clients and guests, welcome to another episode of Jason Sero Talks. Today you'll be listening to Michael Kurjan, a licensed clinical social worker with decades of experience who works in private practice. Michael has been a mentor of mine since I entered my private practice several years ago and has had a profound effect on how I conduct therapy today. He is a masterful clinician that has helped hundreds, if not thousands of clients heal, empower, and thrive through his frameworks of Emdr and internal family systems. I hope you enjoy our interview, and please subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, and don't forget to put the notification bell on so you know exactly when my next video comes out. Without further ado, Michael Kurjan. So, Michael, thank you for joining me today on this call. I think it's going to help a lot of people understand what therapy is, what to expect from therapy. And I know, after working with you, closely with you over several years, I know you have a lot of insight into the whole mental health field that I think is going to be a tremendous value for a lot of people. So thank you for joining me.
Okay, great.
So, Michael, what is an LCSW and how did you become a licensed clinician?
So an LCSW is a licensed clinical social worker, and so I went to the University of Connecticut School of Social Work for 2 years. You do an internship there as well. And you have a certain amount of training and supervision in a clinical field before you're given a license. And I've had additional training in getting that. So not only did I get a MSW, I also have a master's in counseling with a specialization in family therapy from Southern Connecticut State University. And also I went to Clark University and majored in psychology.
And have you had any particular mentors along the way that helped shape where you are today?
Yeah, there were lots of mentors. When I got out of undergraduate school, I became a teacher for 4 years. So I had the experience of teaching fourth grade, which was really actually quite a great experience. And then, but I felt that I had always wanted to be a psychotherapist. I felt a calling to the field when I went to undergraduate school. Undergraduate school was a really exciting time growing up in the late 60s and early 70s. There was a lot going on socially, and there was a lot of things breaking through in the realm of consciousness studies and humanistic psychology, which I studied. So I had some very interesting teachers in undergraduate school at Clark. It was sort of a revelation for me. And I had some good personal experiences that opened me up to what the possibility of human nature could be. And so there was sort of somewhat of a rebellion against the classical order of psychology. I was interested in where the field was going in more the realm of phenomenological studies, consciousness studies, awareness. So I read voraciously, but not necessarily the traditional stuff that I was supposed to read in school. I read that too, but it didn't really interest me as much as the exciting studies of family therapy, um, alternative states of consciousness, human growth. So towards the end of teaching, I took a program in transactional analysis, which is a form of therapy, and I studied with a man named George Kendall. And that was just totally eye-opening for me. After I graduated from social work school, I had some not so great experiences working with administrations. So, but then I had a position in Norwich with Richard Ravlin at United Community Services that was really a fantastic experience and gave me a lot of experience and a lot of supervision and a lot of understanding of the mental health field, and I did that for a couple years. Eventually, I became a school social worker, and that was in a high school for about 4 years, and that was in the late 80s, which was also quite an exciting time as well to work with teenagers. So I had this like variety of experiences and understand underneath all this was, what is the potential for change? How can people change? What were the things that made that possible? I was very interested in that. But and I had had some of that experience in my life and different things that I'd done in experiential psychotherapy for myself. So that was so I did a lot of my own personal work, and which really helps when you're working with people because you can kind of get a sense of what people are going through. Um, so I worked a lot with children initially, and then I started working with adults. But I felt at a time in the 90s that I had reached a point in my life where I was feeling like stuck, a little burnt out by the, 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 the needs that people had and also maintaining a sense of myself. So I entered myself for EMDR therapist, and I thought, well, this is interesting. And I did that for a while personally. And then I said to the therapist, I said, hey, can I do this myself? Because I am an LCSW. And she said, oh, yeah. So interestingly, when I went to the training, um, I met my supervisor from a graduate school there, and she was actually becoming a trainer in EMDR, and she said, "Oh, hi, Michael." So her name was Kathy Davis, and I studied for her for about 10 years until she passed away, unfortunately, in 2010. So, but EMDR sort of made it possible to see the kind of changes that I knew that people sometimes had in therapy, in which they could make major shifts. And so EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it uses eye movements to help people process and move from um, a state of trauma, dysfunction to a more functional view of things. Often there's a transformation that takes place, not all the time, but often enough. But then, so the founder of EMDR is Francine Shapiro. Um, and so I studied that voraciously for about 10 years and became pretty experienced with it. And then along the way, I recognized that sometimes in EMDR things did not resolve. So I started looking into a form of therapy called internal family systems therapy that kind of integrated my experience as a family therapy, my family therapy background way back, with a systems approach internally. Um, and so what was happening with EMDR, people would get blocks and they were not able to sort of get through those blocks. There was something in the way. And I found internal family systems very helpful to get people further along the path. And it's a therapy in its own right, and it's very powerful. And people actually have a kind of a positive sense about the idea of parts that internal family systems talks about. So that was Richard Schwartz. He's the founder of internal family systems therapy. And I studied with him I did a number of level 3 retreats with him, and a lot of training in internal family systems therapy. It's a simple system, but it's also very deep, and there's a lot of parts to it. So,
So I wanted to ask you about the parts. So
you're right.
oftentimes, if I bring that up with my clients, they'll say, part of you feels this way, and another part of you feels that way, and I learned a lot of that from you. And
Right.
and they seem, really kind of confused by that. Like, what do you mean parts? Like, sometimes they'll say, do I have multiple personalities? And I'm like, no, you don't have multiple personalities.
Yeah, everybody has parts. You basically say it's sort of like a feeling, we say a part of us wants this, a part of us wants that. Um, so it's a feeling, it's a sensation, it's an aspect of ourselves, it's a sub-personality. Once you start using it, it's pretty natural, like I have a critical part, I have a numbing out part, I have a part of me that, likes to shop or likes to bake or something like that. And so there's a whole protocol around that you can get into it deeper, or you just talk about their parts. And so some parts are get along with each other, some parts are in opposition to each other. And so people start feeling more comfortable that they're not necessarily one person, that they don't need to just be one single entity. It really helps clarify things a lot for people because they feel better knowing that, oh, they can have a part of them that feels this way and another part that feels this way or does these things.
I've heard you use, terms like firefighter or protector, and that helps
Right.
people also, see what kind of roles that they like to play often. Can you talk a little bit about maybe a
Sure.
typical?
Well, so we have basically different parts, different kinds of parts, and they can be roughly divided into two kinds. The protectors, and there are two kinds of protectors, which are managers and firefighters. Managers are proactive. They're like critical or numbing or striving parts, for example, that are sort of anticipating what's going to go on in a person's life to manage the person's life. And they have reactive parts that are quick fix solutions that are reactive to a situation. So, for example, if a person's stressed out or something's bothering them, they can do this activity or use this chemical and they'll feel almost immediately better. So it takes it away. It's a firefighter, it puts out the fire. But like firefighters can create damage as well, water damage and things like that. So firefighters, for example, if a person has a firefighter that's a spender, for example, if you spend too much money, it's going to create problems with your lifestyle. But on the other hand, it gives you immediate gratification and satisfaction. There are protector parts, firefighters and managers, and then it's also the exiles, which is the vulnerable parts that we carry that we sort of exile often because they carry burdens and traumas that a person doesn't like feeling.
And so from what I understand, you incorporate the internal family systems, interventions into the EMDR.
I do sometimes. Yes, so for example, if a person's working on a particular upsetting event, EMDR is initially focused on trauma, and the person gets to a stuck place. For example, they reach a dilemma between the parts. The parts can't sort of make a decision. So we go into those different parts that are involved in the dilemma, for example.
And so a lot of times clients don't, I'll be approached by clients, but they'll say, do you do EMDR? I want to get right into EMDR. And I know you've talked to me in the past about there's a lot of groundwork made before you get into the actual.
Well, some EMDR therapists do that. They just basically go directly into the trauma. But I've run into trouble doing that, and so I kind of make it part of a bigger psychotherapeutic process. So I get to know the person, and we often go into it very gradually. Like there's a client that I work with who I've worked with for quite a long time, and only recently does this person want to, go into doing this. And I'm like, oh wow. So, but actually, the stage was set for this, 3 or 4 years ago. So, I mean, that will be interesting.
Yeah, and you've talked to me about grounding techniques, and
Right.
can you talk a little bit about how people can use some grounding for a lot of emotion regulation?
Well, in EMDR, in the beginning, there's the assessment of a person's ability to be stable. Because if you do EMDR and you go outside what is it called? The window of tolerance, you can run into trouble. A person can spin out. And that's something that is not effective and actually is quite disturbing. And it's happened a couple times with people, and I don't want that to happen. So you try to titrate the EMDR in such a way that the person will not be overwhelmed. On the other hand, they have to have enough affect so that they can process within the window of tolerance. Um, so having stability techniques such as grounding techniques or breathing techniques, things that they do in their life, developing a safe and comfortable place, things like that are very useful. And with some people, that's a big part of the therapy in the beginning because they don't have that. Other people have lots of grounding and stress management tools that they clearly can use effectively.
And how about the different types of trauma? I would like if you could make the distinction between like a complex trauma or maybe like a single event trauma and its and the
Well, a
application.
single event trauma is a traumatic event that basically the person's functioning really well, and this event, say an accident or a sudden death or something like that, occurs. So EMDR was a lot of the research actually initially was on single event trauma, which showed EMDR to be highly effective for it. And it appears that, from my experience, that that's usually the case. However, very often we find, for example, with a first responder, where you would think that, the trauma from a traumatic event that they had to attend to would just be a standalone event. But then you find that they have other traumas in their life. Lots of first responders do have traumatic events from childhood that influence how they feel when they have a trauma, when they have a present day trauma. So essentially, you have different sort of loci of trauma that can kind of be separate but interact with each other. And so that's called complex trauma.
I'll often be asked too about children and EMDR. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've done some work with children, and so there are a variety of protocols that are used with children. Children who are verbal, even young children like 8 or 9, can use the standard EMDR protocol. But there are protocols with play therapy and I'm trying to think what else. Doing narratives, psychological narratives, using bilateral stimulation to help children. Sometimes children process really quickly too. So,
Yeah, what are the benefits that through the years that you've seen that you can kind of put in maybe columns where this benefit you've seen from this kind of work, from the EMDR applications?
boy, well, see, that sort of ties into what I was talking about initially about my journey to being a therapist. And when I was younger, I found that in my own work that I could get into a positive place in my life that seemed to transcend the difficulties that I had gone through, and that they integrated things that had occurred in my life. So I wanted to be able to see if that was possible to do in my therapy with people. And I'd been in different experiential training programs where I learned different pretty intense techniques to bring that about. But the thing is, doing that in my office wasn't very sensible. So I find that EMDR can help transform a person so that they sort of change the way they look at the upsetting event. So when a person has an upsetting event, they have a certain view of themselves, like the words "I'm not worthy," or I'm not good enough, or I'm defective, or something like that. And as you do the work and you're able to make that transformation that occurs some of the time in EMDR and internal family systems, you go from I'm not worthy to, oh yeah, when I bring up that target, yes, I am worthy. And it really shifts. Sometimes people, it's out of the blue, they have a revelation that is sort of like, oh wow. And then with the processing and the eye movements seem to help, they're able to then shift to really believe that. And so the amount of disturbance goes way down, and often it stays down, not always. And then there are other things that they have to deal with in their life. It's not, it's not always the end all and be all. Sometimes there's work to be done afterwards, and the everyday the everyday aspects of their life, and integrating that revelation, that transformation.
I'll often be asked, how long does treatment, last? I'm sure you've got that question.
As long as it takes.
Is that what you tell your clients?
Not always. Sometimes I have a sense of lots of times people are looking for a specific result, and I give them an idea, but it's always, everybody's unique. I mean, it's very hard to give an exact timeline because everybody has a process that they will go through. And partly it's how determined are they? How much is their motivation? How badly do they want to do this? I mean, sometimes I try to take people where they're at. So I recently was working with a guy who was going to come in for trauma work, but it turned out the person has a lot of other things in their life, and so and then this person's going to be moving, and so I don't know. So we're just going to work on trying to stabilize this person in the present and see how he can do for a short period of time. You sort of take people where they're at.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't do EMDR or internal family systems with everybody. I mean, I let often people know what we can do, and sometimes it doesn't come about until later on. I mean, they're kind of surprised that they can go deeper, but um,
Do you have to allot a little extra time than a typical session, or is it a typical?
I used to allot an hour and a half. Often I do EMDR sessions in an hour, but it depends. Once a person gets going, sometimes they just need, a half an hour.
Oh wow, okay, I didn't know.
Once you get going, once you've done some sessions, usually the initial sessions can be quite intense, and people are usually pretty tired after it.
Yeah, I've heard you talked about that over the years. When we do some coordinated care, you'd say there's a lot of fatigue that you.
There is.
Is there any overlap between other evidence-based, like cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT or any?
Well, those things are often referred to in EMDR trainings. What I see is that EMDR encompasses a lot of aspects of both DBT and CBT and psychoanalysis. So there's it's a kind of integrative process. Uh, Essentially, with CBT, you're taking an irrational belief that you have about yourself, and with the eye movements in time, you're transforming it, hopefully at a deep level. With DBT, there's a lot of mindfulness and dealing with reality as it is, that the mind will go to that which is true as you do the processing. I was reading some work on coherence therapy, and I was like, oh wow, that's an interesting way of looking at the process. And psychoanalysis, I mean, you're going from one association to another. So I would think that people in psychoanalytic or psychodynamic theory would really like EMDR.
Yeah, I think further clarification too, with, oftentimes I'll get someone coming in with wanting a specific type of therapy. And I'm always curious as to where they find that information from, whether,
Yeah.
how do you know you need CBT, or how do you know you need, dialectical behavioral therapy? And everyone has a different scope of experience and knowledge. So, but all sorts of things come into our offices, and we have to.
Well, they're probably attracted to something that calls them forth. Yeah, sometimes I've had people who want EMDR, but they're pretty dysregulated. So sometimes it's not a good idea, or the idea is to go very, very slowly. And there are various ways that EMDR therapists have figured out ways to titrate the therapy so that it's not quite as intense.
And what advice do you have for people that may be on the fence, that are thinking about entering the therapy scene, or looking for a therapist, and they might be kind of hemming and hawing about whether they're going to enter into it? What advice do you have for?
Well, I think if they have a good therapist, then it doesn't have to be an EMDR therapist. I mean, people process whether you're doing EMDR or not. The idea about EMDR and internal family systems therapy, and there are other therapies that move towards transformation, but people process in any kind of therapy. And what I think that people often find is it's not so bad. In fact, it's pretty good, and that actually to be heard and seen is a really a gift in their life to give themselves.
Oftentimes clients will ask me, they don't quite know if they're achieving anything in therapy. Like sometimes the 6, 7, 8 weeks might go by and they're not quite sure. Am I doing it right? Is often a question I'll get asked. Typically, what do you say to that once you kind of get into
Well, sometimes that does happen, and sometimes when that happens, I ask myself, what are we working on? And I try to stay in touch with the person to see if this is helping them, and am I missing something, or are we missing something together? And sometimes people have a lot of things that they have to go through to try to figure out what it is that they want to achieve. But I tried to remember in the beginning, like initially, like I hold it in my mind through the therapy as like, what are you coming in here for? What do you want to achieve? And so sometimes that changes. Often it does change as we start doing the therapy and we see there are other issues that enter into the picture. So I think the thing is for the therapist and the client to stay in touch over the treatment as to what the initial goals are, and is this helping them. I mean, by and large, I would say that people feel a benefit of therapy. They feel their lives are improved. I mean, and that's what the studies show, and that's my sense as well.
And how about when I'm here because my spouse wants me to be here, and so I'm listening to their request.
Okay, so what's the part of you that's here, and is that enough to do the therapy?
What are some typical responses that you'll get from that?
Um, I have to do the work because I want to stay married. Um, well, since I'm here, I'll do what's necessary. I mean, sometimes people, they avoid it. So, at a certain point, I might say, maybe this is enough for you, and come back. These are the things that I see, but come back when you're really motivated to do the work. Sometimes people, what it is though, is that I think sometimes people know they need to work on the issues, and they need a little pushing to make that shift. And I found that a lot of people do know that they need to work, and so they do work on the issues.
How about when clients expect you to give them advice or tell them exactly what to do? How do you typically handle approaches like that?
Well, if I know what they what would be helpful, I might tell them. But I often say to them, I really don't expect you to follow my advice. I think, you need to figure that out yourself. What do you think? But if I think somebody's going to crash themselves in a wall, what they're doing, I'll tell them. I mean, because I think it's a disservice not to say, if you do that, it looks that like this is going to happen. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
But but again, I try to, the usual thing is like, what do you think, or what parts are involved in this in you?
Yeah, I often refer to that as like the conversation within the conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How would you, in terms of differentiate between the age groups, so teenagers, adults, when it comes to your approaches, do you have kind of a general, when you first meet a client, this is typical, no matter how old you are, this is my approach, or do you have certain things that you will do in particular with adults or couples or even teenagers?
Um, that's an interesting question. I think it's good to think about the different developmental stages and assess where a person's at. Essentially, I don't really work with kids under 6. I don't work with too many children anymore between 6 and 12, though I have a tendency to work with kids who are 11, 12, and up, teenagers, young adults. Uh, then we get into the 30s and 40s and so on. And as I become a senior citizen myself, I've worked more with people who are, in their 60s and 70s as well, because I have the experience, which I didn't before. Um, I think initially I try to get a person, get where they're coming from, what they're about, whether a child or a child in the context of a family. Um, with teenagers and young adults, I think it's a fluid stage in their life, and often they don't come into therapy for a really long time. But I'm trying to, get their attention so that I can help them make the transition that they need in their lives. Often parents think that their children will be easier to deal with at 19 to 22, but they may not be. So they're sent in by their parents, and so it's my trying to get their attention to the work that they need to do. And I kind of like that age group, actually.
Are there any difficulties with confidentiality where, let's say you have a client, 16,
I
17.
try to finesse it. I try to be able to have a dialogue with their parents a little bit in general,
Mm-hmm.
but maintain a sense of trust with
Mm-hmm.
with the young adult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have found that most parents are very understanding of confidentiality has been well discussed through many years. It's
Right.
So a lot of parents are really understanding of that. However, you do occasionally have some that will push a little bit, and then you just have to well, at least I do. I have to clearly explain.
Right. Well, the other thing is if that happens, I try to get the parents together so they can a parent and the child together so they can talk with one another. I mean, I think my family therapy background has helped that way. Often with teens and children and young adults, I will have to have some meetings between the parents and the children or young adults.
If we talk a little bit now about the types of conditions that you mostly see or mostly work with, because I know some clinicians only work in maybe just say anxiety and depressive disorders, for example. What conditions do you typically work with?
So I work with anxiety and depression a lot. But within the context of that, there is trauma, firefighters, like addictions of different sorts, um, and a lot about relationships. a lot about relationships. I don't see a lot of couples. I find it a little bit difficult for me to deal with keeping everything straight with a couple. But I will work with a couple when I've worked with both people before. And actually, it's quite rewarding work when it works well. Um, fa- Family issues.
But mostly anxiety and depression.
Well, yeah, and so the training with EMDR on internal family systems is basically around trauma, and so the results of trauma often are depression, anxiety, various acting out behavior.
How about panic attacks? I mean,
Yep,
I've
panic
seen an
attacks.
uptick in panic attacks, especially lately with what the environment that we're in right now. But how do you handle panic attacks within that framework?
A lot of affect management work, um, tracking feelings, noticing what's building up inside that's bringing on the panic attack. Sometimes there's a whole EMDR protocol for panic attacks, working at it as a kind of a firefighter with internal family systems work.
Oh, there's an actual protocol in EMDR.
Yeah, there's a protocol for panic attacks at EMDR for anxiety. There's an anxiety for anxiety. Often in EMDR, what you do is you target the earliest time, the earliest panic attack or earliest anxiety attack, the most intense and the most recent. And so you're working that through, and often people feel better. You have to continue with the affect management work, though, to make sure that they're able to deal with the triggers that come up as well.
So the taping of this interview is October of 2020, and we're right smack in the middle of pandemic. What challenges, and so both sides really, what challenges and positive developments have you come across or treated during this time?
Okay, so I mean, I think people are getting tired of the panic attack. I mean, not the panic attack. People are getting, that's a slip. People are getting tired of the pandemic. Sort of like a panic attack. That's kind of funny. Um, I think people are getting tired of it, and people are doing the best they can do. So we're dealing with, the usual things: anxiety, depression, trauma. But I'll tell you another thing that people talk a lot about is Donald Trump and the election.
In what way?
I think people are really apprehensive and scared. Now, most of my clients, from what I can see, who talk about this, are do not like Donald Trump and are Democrats, but there also are a couple Republicans who talk with me about, how how the situation is upsetting to them in a different way. That they feel sort of angry at the attacks on Donald Trump and some of their friends who think differently.
Do you think it has a direct impact on their mental health?
Yes, I do. I do. I actually did a couple when Donald Trump was elected in 2016. I had a couple people that I did EMDR sessions on due to his election.
Wow.
Yeah, that they felt traumatized by him as a person. So,
Now, I mean, you've practiced through several presidents.
yeah, many presidents.
have you ever seen?
No, no, never, never. And the extent at which it comes up, like one person I was talking to just the other day, I said to her, "How are you doing?" "Oh, awful." I said, "Why?" "Oh, this election and this president." Yeah, it's affected the mental health of people.
I know a lot in the community we talk about the divide that is, our Democratic and Republican parties. There's a divide, but this one just feels a little different. That the divide is, it's almost like there's the sense that I get is just a lot of not only fear but anger if you don't align with each person's.
Yes, yes, I think that's true. Agreed.
Whereas it seems like, just again, and we know that feelings are facts, but in the past, where yeah, there's always been a divide of some sort, but there's at least some conversation, dialogue that could be had, and tempers don't flare. But it seems like the fear and anger, and I'm sure other emotions, can become like a tornado for some.
I think what we have is a polarization, like in internal family systems, the idea of parts being polarized. So our society is polarized, and between different aspects on the Republican side and the Democratic side. Um, I think that there was Richard Schwartz did this very interesting analysis of the United States vis-a-vis internal family systems therapy, in which he talked about the election of Donald Trump as um, he felt that Donald Trump appealed to a certain kind of American who felt somehow left behind, and that he represented to their parts, a hope and a salvation that that they had essentially lost. In other words, it was a quick fix, sort of a firefighter, the way that he acted to their exiles that they were feeling. So I think that's an interesting analysis.
So I wanted to ask you too about uh, any professional initiatives that you're going to be involved in, anything, whether it's private practice, community based, anything that you are either continuing or going to be starting.
So I mean, I'm happy to, talk about my experience over the years, and I continue to train in internal family systems and EMDR, and enjoy working with my clientele. Um, yeah, I very much, I have a very nice clientele right now that I like working with. One of the things that's important to say, since, I've talked a lot about EMDR and internal family systems, is there are more and more internal family systems therapy therapists out there and EMDR therapists out there. So if a person wants to find somebody, you go to Psychology Today and use the menu to put in EMDR or internal family systems, that is IFS. And I think you'll be surprised how many people there are out there doing these therapies. And there are a number of people who do both EMDR and internal family systems therapy, because it's a great combination and it allows people to go deeper. But any one of them does that. And in addition, there are other therapies that allow this to take place as well, that do this transformational work, like AEDP, for example, accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy, um, somatic experiencing, called SE. We have all these acronyms. I'm trying to think what else. Um, I mean, again, just having a good therapist, whether it be a cognitive therapist, DBT therapist, family therapist, a psychodynamic therapist, who can listen to you, and that you feel heard and gotten, can make a huge difference in a person's life.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a challenging time though to find that therapist. I know clients will ask me, or do you have any colleagues? And all colleagues I know, no one's taking any new clients, so it's an especially difficult time, and it's only going to me, I think it's only going to increase the demand. So it's just a very challenging time. But so you're saying psychologytoday.com is a
Psychology Today, find a therapist. Yes, Psychology Today, find a therapist. In addition, there is, you can find EMDR therapists at emdria.org, emdria.org, and go to the Internal Family Systems website. They have a therapist list as well. And a lot of these people in IFS do distance therapy. It is possible to do distance therapy with internal family systems very easily. It really works for it extremely well. And in terms of EMDR, it can be modified to do telehealth that way as well.
So I can't thank you enough. Talking with you over the years, you've been a mentor to me. So I want to thank you for all that you've contributed. Even if you don't even know what you've contributed to me, you've been a
Well, I really
huge
appreciate that, and
influence.
I have enjoyed talking with you.
Michael, thank you once again for taking some time out with Jason Sero Talks and sharing your wealth of knowledge. I know this will help so many people understand how to get the most out of their therapy. Please post your questions below, and we will have Michael back on to answer your questions. If you would like to learn more about EMDR, click on the link below to check out Michael's written material. Please subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, and don't forget to put the notification bell on so you know exactly when my next video comes out. As always, be where you are, be resilient.